Professor Robert Kelly, you are very welcome to the Lead Well podcast.
Thank you so much.
So where I might want to start is, you're a cardiologist, obviously, by trade, but I would say that you're not necessarily a conventional cardiologist. So can you tell us a little bit about why your approach differs and how it differs? So maybe first the why and then the how.
So I am a cardiologist. I trained in Ireland. I worked in the UK, and then I went to the US where I trained in interventional cardiology. So it was all about putting stents in heart attack patients. And so I came back here just short of 20 years ago. That was what I felt would be my career. But the reality is that I end up seeing patients 4 days a week and doing those procedures 1 day a week. So spending time with patients in clinics is a fantastic opportunity that allows me to meet so many different people from so many different walks of life with so many different stories. But I only have 15 minutes on average with every patient. And so how do I tell you all the facts and all the figures about your heart in 15 minutes and expect you to leave the room with all that in your head and actually do anything about it? So obviously impossible to achieve that. So my life has evolved a little bit around all these stories that patients share with me. So I felt that I wasn't answering the needs of patients. I felt that you'd have a stent as an example. Several patients will come back with chest pains, with symptoms, because they never change any of the reasons they got the heart problem in the first place. So in that, I got introduced to this area of lifestyle medicine called, which is all about the behaviours. It's all about the different factors that give rise to why you get sick in life, like smoking, like diet, like exercise, sleep, and stress. I became very interested in that because it's evidenced and decided to start developing an expertise, get the qualifications, and start coaching patients and helping patients make those behavior changes. And that's a very different area of medicine because it's all about helping people to change, whereas in truth, the rest of medicine is, here's your prescription, off you go, see you next year. And then the evolution from that was nobody else was doing that. I became the first board-certified consultant in Ireland to actually offer that as a part of my treatment. So beyond that, as I said, 15 minutes, very short period of time. How do you get patients to actually consume any of this? So I wrote a book, the Heart Book, to convey content around what heart disease is all about and my approach. I then went on and was asked to do a TED Talk. Ironically, a patient put me up for that, feeling that what I was doing as a message was worth sharing, which is what the TED movement is all about. So I did that about how you change your mind in terms of adopting different behavior changes. And then more recently, I've set up my own coaching program called the Heart Reset Method, which is an evolution from that, again, with the purpose of helping patients to change behavior, to try and capture patients over a longer period of time, because that's what I've worked out is the only way you change your behavior. And so that's how it's all evolved that way. In relation to the question you ask, you won't find a single cardiologist in this country. You may be lucky to find one in the UK who actually does it the same way that I do it. It's much more holistic. It's based on the fact that I realize I'm treating people. I'm not treating, say, hearts. And it's ultimately a reality that we all live, and the way we live our lives is actually what determines whether you stay well or whether you get sick.
You mentioned additional qualifications, right? Specifically, you're talking aspects like coaching, you're talking aspects like tiny habits. I know that you're a qualified tiny habits coach, and we might explore what that is in a bit more detail as well. So where you potentially saw the gap in terms of behavior change was, would it be right in saying it was specifically around approaching people with a coaching approach and really understanding habits and how we actually form new habits?
So some of it is related to listening to patients, which I've always prided myself as a skill. I'll often reflect on my time in medical school and say, what things do I actually remember? I mean, I'm out of medical school quite a long time. And I've always felt that I remember the course in clinical psychology that we did in fourth med for some reason, which was all about we learned to listen to patients. We were put in cubicles with actors and taught how to listen to people. And so it's something as a skill I've always retained very, very much. So I think from the lifestyle medicine piece, what people need to understand is that lifestyle medicine is a little bit different to conventional medicine. What the difference is, for lifestyle medicine, you have to be able to coach patients. Traditional medicine, as I said, you just prescribe medication. You don't have to coach anybody. And coaching is a skill you never get taught in medical school. You get taught how to listen, but it's not that you take a list and you do it this way. It's a skill you have to learn. It's very much down to the type of person you are. Everybody knows this by virtue of the different people you interact with in life. Some people, as a coach, personally, I would feel do it much better than others. And that's led me to different courses from my own self-education. So tiny habits I learned a long time ago. The story around tiny habits for me is interesting. I went to a gym locally to where I live. The coach said to me through a conversation like this, he said, have you ever heard of this guy, BJ Fogg? He wrote a great book. It's called Tiny Habits. He does a coaching program online. It's not very expensive. You should do it. And he gives you a load of clients at the end of the program to coach yourself. And you coach them online. So I said, sounds great. Signed up, did his program online, got the list of clients to coach at the end. Then I said, hang on a second, this stuff's really easy. I should start doing this myself. So like all of these things, I like to test them on myself first to see that they work, test them with friends, and then start doing it with patients. And then I started coaching people in work who were very willing to let me do that. And the feedback was incredible. People said, wow, it really is that way. And I think it's interesting, my own reflection. I've been doing that I did that during COVID. So that's 5 or 6 years ago. During the period of time I've been coaching that, it's interesting to watch the press and watch other people. Everybody's talking about small steps. Every single coach has now decided, it's small steps, small incremental steps, do it this way. That makes you accrue a behavior change. If you like it a lot, it becomes a habit. So it seems, at least I feel I've started a trend, thank you to BJ Fogg. But the other areas I've spent a lot of time in my own space is trying to learn a little bit about what motivates people. How can I help patients to change? Because I see that's the fundamental gap. The fundamental gap is you know that you shouldn't smoke. Great example. But you keep smoking. You know that you'd be better off taking 10,000 steps of exercise, but you're too busy. You find lots of excuses not to do it. Or you genuinely have tried something. You've gone on a diet, or you've given up something for the new year. The New Year example, you'll generally break that habit within 21 days, end of. You won't be continuing it on the 22nd of January. The diet world, everybody knows has done a diet. It lasts for a couple of weeks. It's great. You lose the weight. Guess what? You go away on holidays. The weight's back up again. You're not in the mood to do the diet again until, say, 6 weeks before Christmas because you want to look great for Christmas Day. So my own insight from that is there's something wrong with the way it's done. That's my kind of creative mind kind of thinking, well, hang on a second. The diet industry is around for 30 years. They're now all going for injectables. They're not trying to help people make behavior change anymore. People are giving up on the idea of doing this. The world is getting bigger and bigger in terms of body size. What is there? Surely there's a different way of doing this. And then my insights from that were, well, hang on a second, the diet industry is not doing so well. There's a couple of coaches out there in the business world who really transform people's lives. So the people who are the most successful in the world do exactly the same thing. And an awful lot of them do not have an education to begin with. An awful lot left school, went on, set up businesses, and have truly and utterly transformed the world in different areas. So I said, well, hang on a second. What if I was to say, instead of making billions, that the billions were that you would be healthy, or you would keep yourself alive and well and live a long life, and use the principles of the business world as a way to try and help coach patients around their health. And that's ultimately where all my more recent learning has evolved from.
Excellent. And we're obviously putting this episode out right around the festive period. So either people will come back to this in a week or two, or maybe it will strike a chord with them right now. When we think about, just as you've mentioned, taking some of those principles from the business world, applying them to our own health, what are we talking? I have my own ideas around this. So ultimately, there needs to be a strong enough why or purpose in terms of why I would make the changes. And then there's also that, let's say, psychological back and forth of I can't make the change seem too big, because if I do, it's another element of overwhelm, more anxiety for me. So what I need to do is probably focus in on the small actions that I can take. And I also need to be mindful that I don't maybe pick 5 or 6 small actions, because again, I'm falling into the trap of overwhelm. So if somebody's listening to this specifically thinking, I want to make some changes come January time, is the starting point the purpose, the why, spending some time self-reflecting, building awareness, and then identifying, let's say, the smallest thing that might move the needle? Is there anything else potentially?
I think you've said it all. I think the important is you have to make a decision you want to change. I
Yeah.
think that is the purpose. I think the interesting thing with purpose in life is sometimes you mightn't realize exactly what it is. And so I think your idea of spending a little bit of time understanding what your why and your purpose are is invaluable. Now, you don't have to spend the whole of Christmas celebrating Christmas in true style of all the excesses that come with it and decide, oh, sure, I'll put this conversation in my own mind off until January. I think the idea here is to start with something small. I think starting with something small is easy. I think it should be easy. It should be something that you like doing. So you don't have to pick up the most difficult thing, like I'm going to buy a mountain bike for Christmas. I'm going to do all the mountains in Ireland as my new exercise because I'm worried about my weight. The answer is no. If you live locally, take a walk outside in the fresh air, go out and do it every day for 5 or 10 minutes if you can, and then start it off that way. And Christmas is ideal when you're not working. The whole country seems to go out for a walk.
Yeah.
Probably, unfortunately, because we all eat too much. And so there are lots of little things. It's not about changing everything. It's about starting. It's about doing things that are easy to do, that you like doing them, that you enjoy doing it. And it's about reviewing that from week to week. And then in terms of setting a goal for yourself, which is crucial to keep you focused, if you want to lose weight, do not pick that you're going to lose a stone in the next 2 weeks because it just doesn't happen that way. The best way to lose weight is to set yourself up for success. So pick 1 pound or 2 pounds per week and work it through in that way. And it's not difficult to do that. You will be able, through a number of other different tools, identify what it is that contributes to your weight as opposed to somebody else. So they're all the same things that you said. It's just making it easy. The one comment about the purpose, which I think is crucial, is sometimes your purpose in life is that you want to be around for as long as possible. You want to enjoy your family. You want to enjoy your children and your grandchildren. And sometimes when you struggle to say, oh, I need to lose weight, the trousers are a little bit tight, one of the swings on purpose in that might be that you're able to play with your kids or you're able to play with your grandchildren. And when you realize that you can't do it in a minute because you can't bend over your belt or because you get breathless doing it, and you know, well, if you could get the weight down a little bit, you could even go out and play with your children, that truthfully, you will get an awful lot better. And therefore, you'll answer your purpose in that way. You'll have an awful lot of fun doing the exercise or doing something with what you're eating. And you will find you want to continue doing that rather than trying to force yourself to do something else.
Interesting. I want to give you a specific character, right, that I encounter quite often, and I'd love to know how you would approach an individual like this. So if we take a senior executive, and often they have a belief, there's an inverse relationship. I need to sacrifice my health in order to continue to climb the ladder, right? And then they get to a certain point in their career, maybe in their 40s or 50s, right? And all of a sudden, they now are starting to put focus on their health because they realize mentally, physically, my energy is not where it was when I was in my 20s and 30s. And yet I need more reserves of energy. Often when you encounter an individual like that, they're ultimately paid to make decisions, right? So it can often be a challenge to say to them, ultimately, what you're doing in this area of your life is not conducive to you being able to perform for the next decade. They often don't really want to hear that because they're getting paid to make decisions. So why is it any different? I can make the decisions around my health. Give me the information, Robert, and I'll go off and do it. But often, that doesn't result in them progressing in terms of their health. And then that leads me to this idea of, the story that they tell themselves, the limiting belief or the fixed mindset they have in this area. How do you approach an individual like that? Because I'd imagine there's a couple of individuals, although they may not put up their hand, there's a couple of individuals listening to this right now.
So it's a great question. It probably identifies well over 50% of my medical practice, at least in that age group. I think a lot of people don't realize the significance of heart disease. So it accounts for about 30% of the mortality in men. It accounts for 25% of the mortality in women. So it's the number one reason of why you die in this world. And sadly, some of those deaths will happen suddenly. So a lot of men, senior executives, midlife, will find a friend will drop dead. So I had a patient a couple of months ago, 48 years of age, was out for a few drinks on a Friday night with his best friend. His best friend dropped dead at the bar beside him. So he said, uh-oh, better go and maybe check myself out. We live very similar lives. He went off, got himself checked out. He had the exact same blockage that his friend died from. I managed to save his life. He's alive. He's well. But when you talk to men as an audience, what you find is that men think they are invincible. So the senior executive doesn't have time to think about their health because, sure, we're invincible. I'm a leader for a reason. I've achieved this in the world. I'm here to make money. Now, the other statistic you need to be aware of is that what also happened is about 62 years of age, you come into this phase where you think you're going to retire. A huge amount of men increase the risk of having a heart attack right in that age group by virtue of the fact that they don't look after their health for the previous 10 or 20 years. And then the other thing is that coming up, say, just before you retire or in your late 50s is you may not be the senior executive. You want to be the head of the company. But your brain has to work perfectly well. And your brain won't work very well if you smoke too much, if you drink too much, if you don't sleep, if you don't take any exercise, ultimately, if you don't look after yourself. So there's a couple of carrots there to try and encourage you to look after your health. That's the men. In the case of women, what's most interesting is that women, sadly, will avoid coming to see doctors. And most of that is driven by the fact that women are absolutely petrified that people like me will tell you have something significantly going on with your heart. Because you're afraid that you might die and there'll be nobody there to look after your parents, your own kids, your own family and your siblings. And ironically, when I've looked at this, I find this happens in women in their 30s, their 50s, and their 80s. It seems to continue through life. I think the other fact to all of this is you're petrified you might have a stroke and you might survive that. And if you have a stroke, that somebody else is not going to be, you're not going to be able to look after all those people I mentioned. So I think there's a genuine fear amongst women in that situation. You've got a lot of women who are very successful senior corporates these days. And you've got a lot of women who do an awful lot more than just work in the workplace. So I think my own sense is this, I have a desire of people that you'd go and get yourself checked out in your 40s. I accept we all live adventurous and sometimes excessive lives early in life. What happens is you get a little bit older as you realize you can't do it all. That's not a sign of weakness. That's just a reality of life. I think if you look after yourself, I think you're much more likely to preserve your brain, as I've said. You're much more likely to live a lot longer. And I think the price in that is well worth it. I think you also become much more successful. One of the things I learned about business leaders is there's a book out there about a 4-hour work week. It's extraordinary the way you can be exceptionally productive in the space of about 3 hours in your day. So you have plenty of time to do the exercise. You have plenty of time even to do the little steps compared to a lot of people who might be there for 8 and 10 hours. And if you were to look at it, realize you spent a huge amount of time on the phone. You spent loads of times at meetings. Nothing actually happened. So truthfully, there's no excuse whatsoever apart from your own kind of decision that you just don't want to do anything that's actually holding you back.
So would you say, getting them to travel that path of, okay, if I continue my current behaviors, God forbid you were to have a friend drop dead beside you, but if you continue your current behaviors, the trajectory that you are currently on is, yes, poor health, but also when you think about what you've put 2, 3, 4 decades into from a career perspective, you'll finally reach that pinnacle and you won't be able to perform consistently when you get there.
Absolutely. Or you'll develop, the same factors for heart disease cause strokes. So where the women might be worried, the men should be equally worried. You can have a stroke and you can survive it. But it's the same risk factors that cause cancer. It's the same risk factors that cause Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease, as an example, is very significant in the population. So, I think and a lot of people have family histories of these things and don't do anything to check it out. So the same beneficial impact of the lifestyle factors that we spoke about, it protects you or at least reduces the risk of having all these conditions. So again, whether you think that you're above all these things, and so be it, if that's your mindset, I'm not going to change that. But I think for the vast majority of people, I think the women is a good example. Most women just don't see themselves in the mirror. They see everybody else in the mirror. So they completely miss the fact that what you actually need to do to be able to help other people is you need to look after yourself. It is the analogy, as you say, there's It's running a car in an empty tank. If that's as simple as you get it, try driving your car in an empty tank now for the next week and see how much damage you do to the car, and just consider you are the car. So if you don't put any petrol in the tank, it just doesn't work. It breaks down, whatever else might happen. So you have to respect your own body. You have to respect the need to look after it. And ultimately, if you don't, be it your health, be it you have a breakdown, be it that you burn out, be it that something goes wrong in work because you make the wrong decision because you couldn't think straight. I mean, if that's what you want, it is your own individual decision. I would really hope as the cardiologist that's not the decision that you make.
Yeah. So by the way, I really enjoyed your book, right? I thought it was excellent. So I would certainly highly recommend people pick up a copy. One excerpt really stands out, right? And I'd like to maybe ask you if we've progressed at all in this regard. So one little piece says, the Dalai Lama was once asked what surprised him most about humanity. And he answered, man, because he sacrifices his health in order to make money. Then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. And then he is so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present. The result being that he does not live in the present or the future. He lives as if he is never going to die, and then dies having never really lived.
And I think there's another quote, story I told in the book by a lady called Bronnie Ware, who is a nurse in Australia, working in a nursing home, I think, in the hospice space. So people dying from cancer, asking a very similar question of top regrets that people who are dying have in life. And most of them is not living your life. Now, it's not living your life that you live it to excess. It's more that you enjoy the company of other people, that you have purpose in your life, that you connect with family and friends. Because ironically, the people who do that are the people who live long lives, irrespective of an awful lot of the chronic health conditions that they have, but they look after themselves. I think the Dalai Lama's quote is interesting. There are lots of other people who continue to share that message that most of my patients work. And that takes up all the time. You're exhausted going to bed. You fall asleep because you're so tired. You wake up the next morning just as tired, and your life is that treadmill for whatever length of time you want to work. What a lot of people don't realize, some of it's based on sort of legacy that, for example, ask your stressed out people or the fella, your dad, sitting behind the desk with the cigarette, the bottle of whiskey, and that's what stress actually is, when stress is much more simpler than that. But the consequence of stress is a 30% risk of having a heart attack. It also increases the risk of the other illnesses. So if you don't sleep very well, and specifically while we talk a lot about the duration, the critical thing in sleep is do you wake up the next morning feeling refreshed? Because if you don't, your sleep's not doing you what it's supposed to do. And the reality in that is that also increases the risk of having a heart attack, dementia, cancer by 30%. Again, independently of all the other behaviors you might have. And those two risk factors are two risk factors that most GPs or most other doctors will never ask you about. So you have to bear those things in mind. So again, they are the points about your health in life. And as I said, if you spend all your time working as much as you might like it, you have no time for your friends. You have no time for your family. I think the biggest regret in life that people will often have is you grow up working through your life and you never see your own kids because you're working all the time. That kills your purpose, no matter how much money you actually might make in life.
Yeah, you often hear, I'm doing it for the kids. But actually what the kids really want is time with you.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And when we think about stress in the workplace now, we think about, let's say, the evolution, technology, AI, we are experiencing, I see it day in, day out, I'm sure you see it as well, we are seeing people really suffering from high levels of stress, this always on syndrome, heading home after being in the office for the day, taking out the laptop, completely consumed by their work. But obviously that brings a certain level of stress as well. When you think about, let's say, the consequence of those lifestyles, because we've never necessarily, we are in a new era now, the last 2 decades, we might say, and beyond as we keep moving forward, we've never really experienced what we are going to experience coming down the tracks. We're starting to see now, we talk about things like presenteeism, we talk about maybe the rates of mental health incidents within the workplace, high levels of stress being reported, etc. I think we are now at a time where we've got to be more proactive than ever
Mm.
in implementing recovery processes as part of our daily routines, whether it's our mindfulness based exercises, it's breathing,
Mm.
exercise, etc., etc. So I think we've reached a point, and I'd love to get your take on this, where if we went back a couple of decades, maybe we left the office at 5 o'clock, we didn't have a laptop to open up, right? So maybe we were nearly forced into bringing the dog for a walk or spending
Mm.
time with the kids. Whereas now we actually have the laptop there to do more and more work. So not only are we fighting against this emergence of technology, but we also probably have lost a lot of structures that, let's say, used to happen naturally. And now we have to be very purposeful about trying to bring them back into our daily routines.
I totally agree. Even in my own profession, it's the same. I think interesting for me, I came back to Ireland from America in 2007. There was no mobile phones pre-2007. I went to medical school where you did your research by going to your library. I went to school where we used a thing called the World Book Encyclopedia, that somebody came to your house, was selling this to your parents from a suitcase, and you used that to do your geography projects. You took pictures of countries in the world. And then 2007 comes along, the phone comes along, the internet is there, Facebook, LinkedIn, they all arrive a couple of years later. And lo and behold, this is the world that we all live in. And I think that the always switched on is a problem. We're all consumed by information. Our social connection is now our phones. We don't talk to real people. Our work connection is always on. I mean, you take some examples of people go to work at 4 o'clock in the morning because they want to catch up with the financial affairs of what's going on in Asia, and they're in work till 7 o'clock at night. They're back on the phone after dinner. People eat later. That's why you don't sleep so well. You get no breaks during the day, and your brain, even at a biological level, cannot cope with that. So that's where all the burnouts come. You lose interest in your job. You have no purpose. You have no why. Some people are totally focused on making loads and loads of money. I do lots of work with people, with companies like that. The corporate law people, the corporate finance people of the world have huge levels of mental health problems, massive levels of heart attacks prematurely, massive levels, I mean, in 30+% risks of having an acute stroke in both of those professions. But the focus is not on your health, the focus is on your wealth. And I think there is a huge need to change what's important for people in this world. I think there's a massive mental health problem ongoing. The big challenge is most people don't see it.
Mhm.
So the obesity situation in the world is identified to hit about 50% of the world's population in the next 10 years. The challenge with mental health is it'll probably surpass it, but it's easy to see somebody who's overweight. It's very, very difficult to see somebody who is struggling. And so part of that is about talking to people in work, in life. I think we need to identify boundaries around what we're expected to do in work. As you said at the beginning, it's a leadership requirement. People at the bottom don't do things unless it comes from the top. And I think there really is, as I've sort of been on this crusade for a long, long time, is to try and get people to buy into the importance of their health. And it's mental, it's physical, it's emotional. I firmly believe that work would be a much nicer place to be if you do that. I also firmly believe in the principle of small steps. It's easy in the morning to get up from your desk. Believe it or not, that's really good for your health. It's easy to take the stairs instead of the lift. That's really good for your physical activity. Take a break, go out in the fresh air, stick your head out the window, enjoy nature. It's exceptionally good for your creativity. Not smoking, we all know about that. Drinking less, ideally none, much better for you. And spending time outside work with your family and your friends. The computer work can wait till the next day, or you can organize it amongst the team. There's plenty of people who you may or may not know who actually do go home, leave the computer behind and work and bring it in the next day. And as I said about the busy senior executive, you waste so much time doing things that have no value to you or to anybody in your job from day to day. If you actually spend a little bit more time with yourself and your own awareness and time with your family and doing things that you actually love doing, your mind becomes much clearer and it becomes incredibly easier to identify the things that are important to you, that genuinely bring you joy, and they're the things you should do in life. And everything else can either be somebody else's work or it can be thrown in the bin.
Yes. And I know there's a personal responsibility, personal ownership aspect to this, right?
Yeah.
I'd be curious though to explore the environment for a second, because I read this really interesting article last week. Aidan McCullen, have you come across Aidan? Yeah,
Very good,
great
close
mind.
personal friend
Yeah,
of mine. Yeah.
yeah. And he was talking about the idea of, let's say, the initial dissenting voice. So the person who is saying, hold on a minute, we need, this can be done better. And it's the idea of kind of shoot the messenger. If you're the first one to bring it up, generally, even if you're right, your opinion will be not only discounted, but it could end very badly for you. And he gives a great example. I can't think of the person's name, but he gives the great example of the first person to identify, basically, as you were moving from different wards within the hospital, people, you'd know this far better than me, but there wasn't the hand washing processes. And they noticed that, okay, all of a sudden in the maternity ward, a lot of babies were dying from infections. The individual who brought this up and said, hey, I'm after spotting something here, he was not only, looked down upon, he was completely ostracized in terms of the medical profession. And I wonder, are we at a point now when we think of the corporate world, right, where we're not really connecting the dots between how hard we are pushing people, right, way past their limits, not identifying then the impact that has on chronic stress and their mental health, as long as our numbers keep moving in the direction that we want. And it's great me and you speaking here today on this topic, right? But is there an element where we need to wake up a little bit and say, hold on, as you said, there are boundaries in work. You can, we expect a certain level of productivity, but we have to know, that there are limits to this. We can't just keep moving the dial up and up.
I think that the challenges in work, which are a lot to do with companies making money, because that's the ultimate bottom line.
Yeah.
I mean, I work in a hospital. We're owned by a private equity company. I'm afraid it's about making money for them. But I think what's important for people to realize is what else is going on in the world. You mentioned presenteeism, so people coming to work have no interest in their jobs. In the UK, the challenge is people not coming to work, but it's absenteeism. And I know that in the recent past, the UK government felt a lot of that was coming from mental health and obesity issues. So they decided that they'd introduce these injection drugs to help the weight problem in society and hope that a lot of people would come back to work because the health was being engaged with. So I think what contributes to the bottom line is whether you have staff, whether the staff are productive, whether the staff are part of the team. And I think you can only get that right by engaging with the staff and actually identifying the different health aspects that we've spoken about, because I don't think a lot of that's going to change. I take on board that the first in who says things like Aidan refers to about hand washing is always somebody that's going to be criticized because we all hate change so much. But the solution to change is making small steps. It's about taking decisions like the health of my corporation is really, really important. You read all the stories about everybody who runs businesses where somebody senior has a cardiac event or has a stroke. But the problem is your attention span drifts about 5 days after that happens. Their anniversary comes up next year, poor fella, but the company has to move on. So, there is a sense of what's important to you in your life. And I think, again, as I said, where you take up exercise because your children and your grandchildren are important to you in your life, if you have to go back to that joy to preserve your workforce, to get people more engaged, well, then I suggest you go back to that again, because it's a much better way to make your company successful, to keep your staff on board. The staff in the world's population are getting older as well. You're going to run out of people to work. So you're going to have to keep some of the older people in the workplace. You're going to have to face the consequences of dealing with issues like the menopause for women who are in the workplace and keeping women in the workplace. You're going to have to deal with the consequences of people who want to retire in terms of the struggles, the workloads, the physical health, all those other things. So, if you think only for the short term, you're going to have to face the fact that there's lots of challenges that are going to affect your bottom line that go well beyond trying to make a workforce work harder and harder and only break in the process.
That's interesting. You've mentioned a couple of, let's say, future problems that are going to crop up probably a lot earlier than we expect. We obviously are now moving to the point where we've more people in this country over the age of 50 than under the age of 50. So some of the things that you're describing there, do you feel that organizations are taking them into account Or do you think they may be surprised that all of a sudden they're going to have,
I think some are.
yeah.
I think, a lot of the big tech companies, because they're owned by parent companies in the US in particular, have a different way of approaching health. Now, the American model is all funded for. The Irish model, when it comes to health, is not quite the same. You pay your own insurance, as an example, or you don't have insurance. So you have certain companies in this world at the minute who are supporting women who decide, for example, not to get pregnant until you're a little bit older in life, where they're banking eggs for the possibility of fertility treatments as part of an offering for staff retention. And so that's really interesting, but it's even more interesting that you're pushing the age on where the risk to the mother might be a little bit higher. I think you still have to engage if you want to retain staff, say another few decades later, to engage in the changes of life. So menopause is a really obvious one. I think from a men's health point of view, again, you have to engage in the fact that if you want to keep the men productive, if you want to get the most out of people because they want to work with you, you're going to have to support the health, because the brain health is going to decline because you're going to burn out lots of your employees. And I think the other aspect of this that you can see is that if you show up for work and you're not interested, well, then are you of any value there in the first place? And the only reason you're still there is because we can't find other people to take your place, which creates an even bigger problem. I think one of the interesting trends, I have had a couple of teachers in recently as patients sharing stories where there's actually good news on the horizon, which I was saying, well, what's that? So inactivity levels in school are phenomenally high. I mean, the amount of kids who get sick notes from home to say, oh, sore throat, can't go to gym class. And the importance of gym class might be you just talk to the rest of the kids. You don't necessarily have to do the gym. But one of the outcomes of social media at the minute is there seems to be a much greater interest in actually exercising again, which is a wonderful trend to see coming through in a generation where there's a lot of struggles in actually coping with adversity and problems in life. That's your future workforce. So you've really got to prepare for all this. There's lots of problems there. Don't have to be problems, because you can take little small steps to deal with them. But unless you do it now, unfortunately, the problem that you fear most is going to happen at both ends of the workforce. Your margins are going to go down. Your job is probably going to be on the line if you're the senior management team. So I think there's a lot of incentives, good, positive incentives, to change the way things may be done at the minute. And as I said, to make health part of the culture for success.
It's interesting because, maybe in the past we would have had a broad sweep of initiatives and benefits that would have maybe catered for all of the demographics. Whereas I think now organizations, what I'm seeing is strategically looking at those different pockets within the organization and saying, what do maybe the Gen Z guys need, the baby boomers, the millennials? And that's where, even from our perspective, when we came out of COVID, I wasn't sure whether our corporate gym management service was going to come back for multinationals. It has come back with a bang. Why? Because they identify that, we are, as much as we're more connected than ever, digitally, we are becoming more disconnected. So if people are coming to the office, we want to provide exercise classes, a facility, because Gen Z are very much into their health. But there's another aspect to it, which is, as you would know, vitally important to our heart health. It's that feeling of connection, feeling of being part of a community. Yeah. You've looked at tons of research on the world's blue zones or, centenarians, and there is a common thread there where generally they're part of a community. It's not just that they're eating healthy food, they're getting regular exercise. That aspect of social connection is extremely important to their overall heart health.
I think it's absolutely vital. I've done a couple of talks recently in different corporates where it's interesting. You get offered lots of services. You get offered talks, you get offered this, you get offered that. I went into one recently and said, well, because you came in, Dr. Kelly, and you gave us your insights that the attendance was much higher than here's something to do, here's something else to do. I know other people where there are social engagements provided by the partners in companies. So the new graduates get to go out, say, to meet each other for different occasions. As you say, there's a lot of support around different lifestyle pillars. My one criticism around lifestyle pillars is that a lot of organizations provide a vast amount of food for different employees who work for some. That's particularly in the tech industry. which seems kind of to an excess, but I know it's an effort to try and attract lots of different employees.
Yeah.
You can almost live in the office. So some of the incentives are completely contradictory to what the other incentives might be. So, I mean, I think, as I said, where you have an emerging generation who genuinely do want to engage a little bit more, do want a little bit more support, that perhaps the incentives that you already have might need a little bit of review and maybe a little bit of change. I'm not suggesting a salad bar instead of a lot of the egg mountains that I've seen in some of these places, or where you even have the bar at the top of the office to entertain the staff. I'm just suggesting perhaps that is the social connection. Perhaps the connection is engaging with the workforce. Perhaps the engagement is finding a way that we all are actually more productive by looking at it, not just in terms of the money, but also looking at it in terms of the staff that are working in all of these places.
A world of paradoxes.
Totally. As I say, even human behavior, when it comes to changing your behavior, like whatever it might be, the power of being totally irrationally rational is just phenomenal. That you actually know all these things are bad for you, and yet you do them. And I am as guilty as the doctor saying this as anybody else is, because I like certain things, and yet I know if I take too many of them, I'm going to get into trouble. But my other rule of thumb has always been the 80-20 principle. If you do it right 80% of the time, it's usually good enough. If you try for 100%, I say to patients that perfectionism, there's no such thing as it. Sorry to disappoint those of you listening. And I find that actually creates a mental health problem if you try to seek to be perfect all the time. So somebody else said to me recently, the best target to aim for is to be imperfectly perfect.
I like that. As we come towards the end, I want to explore the topic of perceived stress, right? Because anybody listening in looking to potentially make some changes after today, I always say we've got a lot of plates spinning. So we'll have lots of different priorities, right? Mm-hmm. And that can leave us feeling it's a mountain to climb if I want to make any sort of change in my life. I'm very big into the literature around our stress mindset. And then, people like, I know BJ Fogg is Stanford, and Alia Crum, I believe, is Stanford as well. And she looks at a lot of, let's say, our mindset towards stress and then how it impacts us physically. Mm-hmm. We throw that word around a lot as well. I'm so stressed. Are we really as stressed as we believe we are?
So I think the question you ask is fascinating. So I was asked this recently before a talk, could I give an opinion about perceived stress? So that's the idea that you think you're stressed all the time. And there's some terrible statistics when it comes to women in particular in this area. And that is where I mentioned that you have a 30% risk for a heart event, such as a heart attack or a stroke or even sudden death in the context of chronic stress. So you're stressed all the time. And most of the stress is scored sort of on a level you think you're stressed versus I am stressed, as opposed to a big, long sort of psychiatric tool of which there's loads of them out there. You'll be stress filling them out. The bottom line is that the risk with perceived stress increases your heart attack risk to almost 50%. And the challenge I find, say, with women as the listener, is that a lot of that perceived stress you pick up when you're a teenager. You go through school. I talked about the younger generation not being able to cope, the post-COVID effect that people might talk about, the generation where mom and dad do everything for you, or you don't have an opportunity to leave home because you can't afford a house and everything else. So the challenges of actually making decisions yourself just add to more and more stress. Now, sadly, if you were to say that on the basis of science, you can see that it'll really load you up for the worst physical health you could think of, unless there are ways to deal with that. So I think the perceived stress is important. I think the other situation, how do you deal with that while you can do the breathing exercise that we spoke about, while you can do an awful lot of these other things? I'll share with you one new behavior that I have become very engaged in. And it comes out of a challenge that myself and a dear friend who's a CEO decided to do for the month of November. And for this month of November, we decided that instead of growing mustaches or running thousands of miles, we would try to embody gratitude as a habit for the month of November. So doing that is about feeling grateful in the different things that you do in your life, as opposed to writing a list of things or writing a letter or writing them on little Post-its and sticking it in a jar and pulling it out and reading them, all of which are incredibly beneficial things to do for your health. And one thing just to say to you about gratitude is it's fantastically well studied scientifically. If you want any references, follow up with me. It is incredible, its benefits to your stress, to the way you clear your mind, to your health, to your engagement with your own self-care, to your desire to actually look after your health. It is just profound in what it does.
Positive psychology, Martin
And it is a
Seligman.
positive psychology. There's a little bit more, but the idea that in calming your mindset, you start becoming aware of the tiniest little things in life. I pick up on things that people say to me as patients that I'd never have heard before, but they've always said it to me. My mind has just been so busy trying to do everything else, next patient, letter to be done, blah, 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 blah. Same at home. And it's as simple as appreciating the simple things in life. The important thing is they're not things you can buy. So you can't be grateful for the next car you're going to buy. You have to be grateful for things even like the fresh air or the trees. But getting into the routine, even of doing it for a month for me, has been profoundly transformational. And it has brought my stress level down because I don't get as reacted to things that really aren't that important or to what everybody else says. It's freed up my mind to be able to pick the things that I genuinely want to do. I find my emotional health level is much, much stronger. And it really has had a profound effect by actually embodying it. It's not writing a list, done that in the drawer. I give an introduction when I talk to a lot of audiences, which is the idea that I ask you to sit back in your chair for a moment, close your eyes, and to think of one grateful moment from your childhood. And the important piece about thinking about it is, why is it a grateful moment for you? And how does it make you feel? And then I exit you out of that by getting you to do a box breathing exercise to stretch and to open up your eyes. Try that for the next 30 days through the Christmas and New Year's time. And just then you can add other behaviors around your eating habits or around your exercise and all the other things as tips that we mentioned. And just see where your stress level is at the end of your Christmas and at the end of January.
Thank you for that tip. One final point maybe. You mentioned the word there, emotional health. And I don't think we talk about mental health, we talk about physical health. You alluded to the idea that this gratitude practice has helped your emotional health.
Mm.
Could you describe to us what you mean when you're saying emotional health?
I think for me, it's about dealing with day-to-day, dealing with life, dealing with busyness. I think it's about a certain acceptance, as I said, about perfection. I think when you work as a doctor, as an example, or an awful lot of senior jobs, your desire to be perfect, particularly as a doctor, where you want to serve every patient to 100%, and being able to accept that that's not actually possible, but you'll do your absolute very best, and whether you accept that your very best is good enough. I think most senior corporates probably have the exact same experience in the mindset. I think you have to have a certain level of maturity, or people talk about emotional intelligence and other factors, that you understand that you accept that, and that you look after yourself and you behave in that way, rather than run the risk, which is the consequential stress or the consequential burnout, or even not getting burnt out, but just getting so exhausted that you lose interest in an awful lot what you do. And I suspect a lot of this also feeds into a number of the mental health challenges that are there as well.
Yeah, I think awareness around emotional health is very low in population wide. I think we move so fast that we often fail to stop and actually ask ourselves the question, how am I feeling at the moment? Do I feel like I'm on the right road? Am I on the right path? Am I just putting the head down and just continuing to push forward without actually really stopping and asking myself, is what I'm doing making me feel a certain way, whether it's good or bad or indifferent?
But I think that's about understanding your why and your purpose in life. And I think a lot of people don't know what that is. I think you go into work, you do your job, you get paid, you come out, you go into work, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is probably where the origins of that are. I think one of the big challenges in life is I often say in practice to patients, you know all this stuff already. If you were to think back to when you're about 6 years of age, your mother told you, get out in the fresh air, go and make some friends, eat your dinner, get an early night's sleep, don't think of any bad things in life, and all those sort of good behaviors. You became 7 years of age. You said, Mum is wrong. What would she know? I'm much brighter than she is. You went through the next 50 years of your life and you realized, well, maybe I should have listened to my mother. And then I turn around and say to patients, I feel like I'm a professor of common sense, that if we all followed common sense, life would be great. But then all these technologies came along and lots of other people came along with their opinions, and you learned lots of things from travel, from education. And guess what? You've lost that ability just to bring it back to who you are, learning a little bit about you as a person, becoming self-aware. And I think that's what the issue is. You don't talk to people anymore. The phone is a great source. You talk to a piece of technology to tell you how you are. It doesn't do feeling. And so I think that emotion piece is actually where the biggest challenge. And I think it's probably one of the biggest crises out there at the moment. I think that we've kind of lost connection with ourselves. And I think that's what's having the consequence, because probably the best way to find it is another one of those mother moments when you're a child is what's that phrase that a problem shared is often a problem solved. So I think that is, you learn a lot from other people. You don't necessarily have to agree with them all the time, but they usually tend to have something that'll help you get through either an initial problem or even through the rest of your life.
Goes without saying that you cover those topics and the rest of what we discussed today in great detail in your book. I would highly recommend it. It's certainly going to be a stocking filler for some of my family. The heart book for anybody who's interested. And Professor Robert Kelly, thank you very much for your time and insights today.
And thank you so much. And I wish everybody a very happy and a healthy 2026.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for joining me on the Lead Well podcast. As always, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.